So let us now, ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about the overall picture of Vishaka. Let's start getting into the interpretation of planets falling into the sign of Vishaka. So, this is what we're going to read. I'm going to do my best to describe what's given in the text, and as well to describe what might align with the Rahu and Ketu reading that I can get, that I've kind of digested and worked out in my own way a little bit. Let's see how it goes. So this is interpreting planets in the sign, in the nakshatra of Vishaka. And this is all planets, not just the rising sign and the moon. Healthy Vishaka indicates passionate dedication to teams and partners. And so Vishaka has a genius for being able to join and unify distinct and apparently disparate things. So Vishaka tends to function better when activated by planets that signify long-term commitment. The Sun and Saturn are an example of planets that abide by this long-term commitment energy. So Sun and Saturn can work well in Vishaka. We also read that planets that signify partnerships can do well in Vishaka, and this includes Mercury and Venus. Although Venus in particular, Mercury is pretty good at keeping things easy sleazy, but Venus may lean towards interpretations of being overly and overtly sexual, while Saturn, Sun, and Mercury might actually go in the opposite direction. It's where they've got a deeper goal in mind, so that they can really even be a part of, Vishaka resonates with aesthetic erotic harmony. And they can apply themselves to aesthetic erotic harmony without necessarily having to, how do you describe it? When you're creatively working on something with somebody, there is a fusion, an interweaving of energy fields that can take place. And it's in the fusion of these two that an energy is created between the two of you that allows goals to be oriented with mutuality, that allows creative ideas to have the seed of both people inside of them. All of these things doesn't necessarily mean that you have to actually end up with a copulation that's going to evolve in sexual concourse with each other. If that has to happen, then that's its own rock and roll thing. But that is sort of kind of an end goal. And once you hit the end goal, the energy of the continuity of the creative process can end there. And what Vic seems to be telling us is that with Saturn, Sun, and Mercury in Vishaka, they can kind of enjoy the aesthetic harmony without necessarily having to end it in copulation, whereas Venus can be overly sexual. Venus in Vishaka can really bring this to a, let's actually have sex and make the physical, tangible soul connection that can be for better or worse. But Venus is still a good planet here because it is a planet of coupling. Ideally, if you've got Venus here, you want to try to make sure that the couplings that you do are sattvic. They have a sattvic purpose to them, and you're not just enjoying the rajasic excitement of the connection for its own sake without having a deeper goal involved. Because then if you just get addicted to the excitement for its own sake, we can see some of the branching happens with Vishaka that we're going to talk about now. Malfunctioning Vishaka indicates the tendency to abandon a partnership when another one comes along with a better promise of harvest. It can also suggest one party exploiting a dependent party in a union. I've done this myself because I actually have Mars combust by the sun in the sign of Vishaka. So I can really relate with this and resonate with this. I don't want to put too much of my own personal trip on it. That's why we've got the text. But it'd be worth saying it. Yeah, so I'll say this before we get into this. No, I'll say this first. So Vishaka, when it malfunctions, it indicates a tendency to abandon partnerships when another one comes along that has a better promise of harvest. It also suggests one party exploiting a dependent party in a union. Mars, the moon, and the nodes can particularly bring out this nature of Vishaka. For Mars in Vishaka, there's an independence that Mars subconsciously seeks. It's almost like Mars in Vishaka wants a partner who will let Mars do its own thing. But that ruins the coupling. That's not the coupling. That's not the fusion that is supposed to be Vishaka at its best. But that's what Mars and Vishaka wants to do. You're a partner who likes to do your own thing, and I'm a partner who likes to do my own thing. So then they come together, and that aesthetic harmony yields productive fruit of both enjoying being on their own path. It's just that it's not going to be nearly as juicy or conducive to the true power of Vishaka because there's no Yugani. There's no deeper layers of connections. It's just that I'm doing my thing and you're doing your thing, and we're doing it for the same purpose, but we're not doing it together. That's the Mars's independence can frustrate. There's a desire to have this, but it can't bring it together. There's a desire for coupling, but its independent nature ruins it. And also, especially, will go and look for other partners that possibly promise better harvest. The moon can fluctuate in its desires and goals. What is the deeper goal that I'm looking for? You know, the moon will fluctuate and have a tendency to want to couple with this person because this person can really bring me to this goal that I have right now in my life. But then like 3 years later, the moon's Vishaka, the moon's just has a desire to couple for its own sake. And so the coupling for its own sake that would yield the best result could change after 3 years. The situation's changing, my goal is changing, your goal might still be the same. Because Vishaka moon is going to attract people who have this capacity, but the moon is going to make them want to fluctuate into another one that promises better harvest. It can, that is to say. Of course, just like someone who has Mars here, or the moon here, or the nodes here, you can always act in accordance with your nature and still abide by universal truth and principles. If you want to get married and you consider that an important truth and principle for yourself, you're going to feel the internal upwelling of the moon in Vishaka, and well, maybe I'd be better off partnering with someone else, but you can still maintain the one partnership and just express your Vishaka in different ways with different people, but stay married to your partner if that's important to you. Because of course, we are ultimately beyond the astral spheres. The magic of our minds can do anything. We just want to keep it in alignment with the astral spheres of astrology. But sometimes we have to consciously resist the negative dimensions of an astrological tendency in order to keep the good but eliminate the bad. You know what I'm saying? The nodes can bring difficulty in Vishaka due to unpredictable instability. So this would be the problem with the nodes going through the working through the sign of Vishaka, is that they have an unpredictable instability. whether that means them suddenly finding another partner that's really beautiful and really promises great rewards, and they're so intrigued by that. That's probably more Rahu and Vishaka in particular. It's going to be attracted to the grass being greener on the other side, the possible productivity that could come from another partnership. Vishaka, Rahu and Vishaka would be a person who has a deep desire to connect with others in order to make themselves, to compensate for the weakness inside themselves and to make themselves better. Or at least stronger by the union. So it's likely that for somebody with Rahu in Vishaka, the Ketu is probably going to be either in Kritika or Bharani. And that's going to tell you something. If your Ketu is in Kritika, then you've got this sort of, you're coming from a place of single-pointedness, be interesting to have Ketu in Kritika and then Rahu in Vishaka, because your emphasis is on your past life. Ketu would be in Agni. So you would have a past life nature that is very fiery. But the Rahu wants to take your fiery digestive nature and lead with it and have power and display not only the submission to a power higher than you, but also to be a power to someone who's lower than you, to be the shot caller, to be the Indra. So that would be a change for the Rahu in Vishaka person. For a person with Rahu in Vishaka and Ketu in Bharani, it would be different then as well. Bharani is ruled by Yama, is the judge, is a good judge of character, and the Ketu in Bharani would have a desire, would be probably overly judgmental about other people, or have an idea of the type of people they want to be with, but the Rahu will make them question how they overjudge or have too strong an idea of the Ketu and Bharani, too strong an idea of the type of person they would work well with. Rahu and Vishaka is going to bring you into the fruits, the smoky mystery of, wow, me and this person could do a lot of great work together if we just sign some terms, like let's work together as a possible business person. Let's work together in a relationship, or let's just live together, see how it goes from there. And then Rahu and Vishaka, you're living with the person. And, it's almost like for Rahu, the thing about, here's something I'm going to say. For Rahu and Vishaka, it's almost, the Yugani is almost more important than the Krishamana. That's the funny thing about Rahu when it's working through a nakshatra, is that it's going to really lean into the parastat, at least in this case. They're going to be leaning into, they're going to desire the smoky mystery of what's beyond the promise of the coupling. What's that going to feel like? What's that experience going to be like? And there's going to be many people who promise that tasty promise. And it could drag them through lots of good couplings and lots of bad couplings. But for them, the coupling, the trying it out, the experimenting and exploring with it for its own sake is what they're really attracted to. And hopefully, if the Lord of Rahu is doing well, in this case, in today's day and age, while Vishaka falls mostly into Scorpio at the present time, that means that the Rahu Lord is Mars. So if Mars is well placed, then these Vishaka couplings that Rahu experiences are all probably ultimately going to lead to Krishamana, to positive, constructive, fruitful results. But also anything could happen too. If you've got a planet that has difficulty here combined with Rahu, if you've got the moon here debilitated with Rahu, then the Rahu's Vishaka couplings are going to bring difficulty. It's going to be combined with the sort of self-negligent aspects of the debilitated moon. If you've got Saturn here Saturn can do okay in the nakshatra for its own sake, as we know, in Vishaka, but Saturn has difficulty in Scorpio. It's in the sign ruled by an enemy. So these are examples of how you got to read into the nature of Rahu in the nakshatra, as well as all the fixins of the sign of the zodiac astrology. Now, when Ketu is in Vishaka, it's going to be a little bit different. Somebody with Ketu in Vishaka has probably spent a lot of time doing this coupling. They're probably a little bit wiser about it. But what happens with Ketu is that it's also smoky in a way. We think that we've mastered our Ketu. And so what happens is that life is going to teach you that you actually don't know as much about being wisely coupling with people as you might have thought. You're either going to couple with people who you instinctively think like, yeah, duh, this person's going to work well with me. You know, Ketu is a past life thing that we've always done. It's predictable. It's a pattern inside of us. So especially if the Ketu Lord has not been well placed in the chart, then Ketu will find it's natural to partner with people who are not actually good, who are not producing good Krishamana. But it's also possible that the Ketu might think that it knows what it's looking for in a partnership. So it's going to stick to a certain type of person, a certain type of partner. And it might be very well, Ketu can really bring out the sort of tendency to exploit or be exploited, where one person in the party is the exploiter and the other person is the exploited. Depending on where the Ketu Lord is placed or what's going on in the sign that Ketu is falling into, that's the zodiac sign. In today's time, that would be Scorpio, tropically. So Ketu is either going to be unconsciously identified with partnerships that are not productive, that are not good for it, that are not bringing good fruit, but they just think that this is the fruit that I need. You know, in today's time, in Christian society, someone with Ketu in Vishaka, their parents might push them, you know, you got to have kids someday. You've got to just find a man. Let's say this is a woman. You got to find a man, one who's strong, who's going to provide for you and your kids. And once you've got that, you'll be able to figure everything out from there. Just do the important thing and connect with someone that's good for you. Person's like, okay, I'm going to do that. Mom and dad said that I should go and just connect with somebody. Oh, this person's got strong muscles and he's got a job. I never see him. He doesn't take care of the kids. He's actually kind of a piece of shit, but seems to be what I need. Seems to be the Krishamana that I'm looking for. And then so you couple with this person, and all of a sudden, the true Krishamana, the true product, the true crops that you're looking for, you realize you're not getting it from this place. So it's either you've connected with Ketu and Vishaka, either you've connected, you unconsciously connect with things because you don't think about what you're truly looking for. You don't think about what you truly want in a partnership yet, because you haven't mastered it yet. When you go through your 40s, particularly 43 and 48, you're going to master your Ketu. And you're going to actually know, through having gone through what doesn't actually serve your spirit and coupling with other people, you'll learn what actually does. So it'll go one way or the other. Either it's your positively Ketu and positively making these connections with people who don't serve you, or you are ignoring ones that could be good for you, and you're ignoring all of them. Again, it depends on what's going on. Depends on the person, the moon, the rising sign. You know, different rising signs are going to deal with Ketu and Vishaka in different ways, right? A Leo rising having Ketu fall into Vishaka, it'll be in his 4th house. And a Leo rising is going to have a certain consciousness because that Ketu will probably also be in the 4th house. So it's going to mean something different than it would for, you know, an Aries rising who's going to have this Vishaka in the 8th house. This Vishaka Ketu in the 8th house. For the Leo rising, they might find themselves, the 4th house is a very dire, precious thing. Leo probably, because the 4th and 9th is connected for Leo. Mars rules Scorpio and Aries. So for the Ketu to fall into the 4th house of Scorpio for a Leo rising, let's say, for example, Ketu is in Vishaka in the bottom of the chart, the Leo might find itself letting go and not necessarily picking everybody, because the private life is very important to them. Whereas an Aries rising, that's not necessarily the case. A Leo can still get stuck in that case on picking people that aren't good for it. So in any case, regardless, you're either picking partnerships that are not good for you because you're not thinking about the end goal of it, or you're ignoring relationships. You're ignoring the mystery. You're ignoring the intrigue because it's almost too tantalizing, to connect with people who might actually be good for you. You see somebody who you'd love to connect with. They're an artist, or they're a lover. They're a potential lover. They're a potential marriage partner. And they seem to have everything. They have all these connections that you guys could connect on. But the Ketu and Vishaka almost isn't like, am I really, do I love metal music? Like, what do I really love? The Ketu and Vishaka person wouldn't know what's worth connecting on with another person. And this ultimately leads them to miss out on the Krishamana as well. They never explore what they would really seek in partnership. Either because they're digging into the wrong ones for the wrong reasons, or they're not digging into any because they're ignoring this critical dimension of their soul. Because they've probably spent a lot of time in Vishaka, they've spent a lot of time in past lives coupling with people, and it's too intense. They're antagonized by it. They probably had to when they were younger. Their parents probably forced them to when they were younger, and now they're nervous too. Either that or their parents and their parents' relationship was very testy and intense. And so the Vishaka person sees the intensity that can come from that, and they were affected by it when they were young and saw it in their parents, and now they're affected by it when they're with other people. Which all in the long run just needs to mean at some level that they need to just break through it, just like the Rahu person does, is experience what's going on in your soul. There's an evolutionary path and goal there that's important for you, but trust that as time goes on, it's going to get less confusing and more satisfactory, more enjoyable. Interesting that someone, Zinnia Quaor, has asked, what about midheaven? I hope I said your name right there. Interesting to have the midheaven in Vishaka. It's likely that such a person would probably have their career somehow related to this coupling. Someone who is like a matchmaker, or just someone who applies themselves to connecting with people for emotional and objective reasons. Because remember, Indra is the sort of like, we both love metal music and we both have emotional passion that comes from that. Agni is like, what are we going to do with it? Like, we're going to go and see a concert, then we're going to buy the t-shirts together. And maybe when we come home, let's like cut our t-shirts and make like a flag out of it together. And then we'll bring that flag to the next show that we have. What's the goal-oriented purpose that our emotional passion is going to bring? So the midheaven here is going to be someone who thinks about these kinds of things as it applies to their career, to their job. Ruby Hind is asking, would this also apply to Sun in Vishaka? I often question and overthink connecting, and you also have Aries rising. So your Aries rising, the 5th lord, the Sun, is falling into the 8th house of Scorpio in this case. And you have the Sun in Vishaka. What we've read is that that's actually, Vic Dicara mentions that that's actually a good thing, because typically the Sun is going to be very much strongly thinking about the Krishamana. The sun has the long game picture in its mind. It's who you eternally are. The sun eternally comes back to who you are. I mean, mind you, you can have lunar placements, or you can be a lunar moony person, and that sun consciousness isn't always as constant for you as it is for a strong sun person. But if you have the sun in Vishaka, it's likely that you'll partner up with somebody who will remind you of these eternal aspects of yourself, and it will be a good thing. The sun does well in Vishaka according to Vic Dicara here. And it makes sense that the sun's going to be coupling typically with someone else who the coupling is coming through the sun, which is an eternal part of ourselves. It's an aspect of our Atman that's not really going to change over time. So the coupling that you do with the sun in Vishaka, Ru behind here says that you overthink connecting. You question and overthink connecting. I think it's possible you might, I don't know this for sure. We'd have to look over your whole chart. But I invite you in this moment, due to the logic that we've applied here, I invite you to consider that questioning and overthinking might actually be your sun being positively discerning. I'm not going to partner with just anybody that doesn't connect deeply with who I truly am, because that coupling will lead to a connection, and the connections can be hard to undo. And the sun in Vishaka wants those connections to be worthwhile, to really, ultimately, the sun in Vishaka doesn't even necessarily need someone to couple with someone for a reason that necessarily brings emotional enjoyment. It's more that we are both passionately involved in this goal, and if we're not, then I'm going to question it. So I hope that that's clarifying, Ruby. I hope that gives you a little bit, at least, to think about. I'm not going to say that that's a direct answer for what you have happening there, but I'd be willing to say that the sun in Vishaka, questioning and overthinking connections, I would say that that's in the service of being discerning in the connections that you make. And that's what makes the sun good in Vishaka. So it's not being willy-nilly about connections, it's looking for what's ultimately going to be positive. Now, one more thing, everybody, that we have to say before we continue on is Jupiter. What happens when Jupiter is in the sign of Vishaka? Jupiter is considered to be rather neutral here. Awesome, Ruby. I'm glad that resonates. Jupiter is neutral here, suggesting fertility and some real fertile sort of connection capacity, but with some Machiavellian tendencies towards one's morals. Interesting. So the coupling, Jupiter could do that coupling. But when, Jupiter is this sort of resonates with Indra more than any other planet. The lightning bolt of Zeus, of Indra, it's very much Jupiter, the Indriyas, the inner wisdom of the spine. So Jupiter, being the Lord Indra, can probably be a bit Machiavellian when it comes to one's morals. Machiavellian meaning, there was a guy named Machiavelli who was very masculine and sharp in the way that he ruled. And he liked to have a leader, a ruler who is calling the shots. And he liked it when a leader who fights his way to be the leader, to be the guy on top, gets the freedom. Leaders, according to Machiavellian consciousness, leaders should have the freedom to make decisions that are wide-ranging, because then their decisions can dig deeper. But we can see why that's interesting that Vic calls that neutral. Can almost suggest a sort of totalitarian bent to how one operates in partnership. But since it's Jupiter, it does well-ish in Scorpio. Again, since we're tropical astrologers, I'm talking about the planets falling into Scorpio at this time. If any extraterrestrials read this video 3,000 years from now, The nakshatra will have moved on from Scorpio at that point, so you'll have to excuse that fact. But Jupiter in Vishaka, in Scorpio, Jupiter does okay in Scorpio because it's friends with Mars, but Scorpio's a tamasic sign, so Jupiter's just going to we need to just do what's most important. It's securing rather than inspiring. And the securing nature of Jupiter in Scorpio is going to bleed into that Machiavellian tendency from Jupiter in Vishaka.